February 20th, 1991. Whitney Houston had just won her third Grammy of the night when Quincy Jones cornered her in a backstage hallway with an offer that would either make her the greatest artist of all time or destroy her completely. What happened in those 60 seconds changed nothing that night, but haunted both of them for the next 21 years. If you love untold stories from music's golden era, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment about your favorite Whitney moment. You won't believe what Quincy was willing to risk. The Shrine Auditorium was electric that night. Whitney Houston was dominating the 33rd Annual Grammy Awards, already claiming Best Pop Vocal and Best Female R&B Performance. The night was hers and everyone knew it. But in a dim hallway backstage, Quincy Jones was pacing. The legendary producer had been planning this moment for months, waiting for when Whitney would be confident enough to imagine something bigger than what Clive Davis had built for her. Quincy checked his watch. Whitney's category was coming up soon. He positioned himself strategically, knowing she'd pass through this hallway after her win. In his jacket pocket was a contract his lawyers had drawn up 3 weeks earlier. $10 million. 3 albums. Complete creative control. When Whitney rounded the corner, flanked by her publicist and assistants, she was glowing. The beaded white gown caught the overhead lights, her smile genuine. The kind that came from pure triumph, not the manufactured version she'd learned for cameras. Whitney, Quincy's voice cut through the congratulatory chatter. I need 60 seconds. Her team hesitated, but Whitney raised her hand. Everyone in the industry knew Quincy Jones. You didn't refuse him. Give us a minute, Whitney said. They stepped back, just out of earshot. Quincy moved closer, his eyes intense in a way that made Whitney's smile fade slightly. You just won your third Grammy tonight, he said. You know what that means? That I'm having a good night? Whitney's tone was light, but she was studying him carefully. It means you're at the exact moment where you get to decide what kind of artist you're going to be for the rest of your career. Quincy pulled the folded contract from his pocket but didn't hand it over yet. Clive made you a star with pop formulas and safe choices. I'm offering you a chance to become a legend. Whitney glanced at the papers, then back at his face. Quincy, what is this? Leave Clive. Come work with me exclusively. The words tumbled out urgently. 3 albums. Pure jazz. Real jazz. Not smooth radio garbage. Gospel. Actual gospel. The music you sang before fame. Experimental. Whatever's in your soul that Clive's team keeps in boxes. He finally extended the contract. Whitney didn't take it. I'm offering you $10 million in complete artistic freedom, Quincy continued, his voice intense. No interference from label executives telling you what's commercial enough. No more singing other people's visions of who Whitney Houston should be. Just you, your voice, and music that actually matters. Music that will outlive all of us. The hallway suddenly felt smaller. Whitney could hear the ceremony continuing in the main auditorium, another winner giving another speech. But it seemed to be happening in a different universe. Quincy, she started, but he cut her off. I know what you're going to say. Clive discovered you. Clive made you who you are. Clive is family. His voice dropped lower, more intimate. But Whitney, is this really who you are? Or is this who Clive needed you to be to sell records? The question hit something deep inside her. She thought about the songs she sang in the shower, the Aretha Franklin and Sarah Vaughan records she listened to when no one was watching, the improvisations she did in church that never made it onto her albums because they were too raw or not radio-friendly. You have the greatest voice of your generation, Quincy pressed on, but you're using it to sing safe. You're a racehorse pulling a grocery cart. Whitney's publicist was making urgent gestures. They needed to get to the press room. I need to think about this, Whitney said, reaching for the contract. Quincy shook his head. No, that's the problem. Clive's made you calculated when you should be instinctive. The Whitney who sang in church didn't think. She felt. That was before I had responsibilities, Whitney said, and there was an edge in her voice now. Before I had a career, a team of people depending on me, fans expecting certain things. Exactly. Quincy's voice was soft now, almost sad. You've learned to be responsible when you should have learned to be fearless. The moment stretched between them. Down the hall, her team was getting agitated. The press room was waiting. But in this hallway, Quincy was offering her an exit from the golden cage. Whitney looked at the contract. $10 million. 3 albums of complete artistic freedom, a chance to be respected like Aretha, like Ella. But it would mean betraying Clive Davis, the man who saw her potential at 19, who turned her into a global phenomenon. He'd been more than a producer. He'd been a mentor. Clive trusts me, she said finally, and Quincy knew he was losing her. Clive owns you, he corrected gently. There's a difference. Whitney's eyes flashed. Nobody owns me. Then prove it. Take this contract. Make music that scares you. Stop singing what you think people want to hear and start singing what you need to say. For a brief, shimmering moment, Quincy thought she might do it. Her hand moved toward the papers. Her lips parted as if to say yes. But then something shifted in her expression. A door closing, a light going out. I can't, she whispered. Clive is family. He believed in me when nobody else did. I can't walk away. Quincy slowly withdrew the contract, folding it back into his pocket. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that made Whitney's throat tighten. Then you'll never know how great you could have been. The words hung in the air like smoke. Before Whitney could respond, before she could defend herself or argue or ask him what he meant, Quincy turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the backstage labyrinth. Whitney stood alone in the hallway for 15 seconds that felt like hours. Then her publicist was calling her, and she was moving toward the press room, answering questions about her wins while replaying Quincy's words on an endless loop. That night, she went home with 3 Grammys and a question she couldn't shake. Had she just made the biggest mistake of her career? But the real tragedy of that Grammy night wouldn't become clear for another 10 years. In 2001, Whitney's world had changed. Her marriage to Bobby Brown was tabloid fodder. Her voice showed strain. Drugs were no longer whispers. Her last album underperformed. Late one night, she sat in her Atlanta home studio, surrounded by awards that felt like someone else's artifacts. She dialed a number saved a decade earlier, but never called. Quincy Jones answered on the 3rd ring. Hello, Quincy. Her voice was different than he remembered, rougher. Weathered by years of touring, recording, living, tired in a way that went beyond one sleepless night. It's Whitney. There was a long pause, heavy with unspoken history. I know. That offer you made me, she said, back in 1991. Is it still open? The silence on the other end of the line was worse than any rejection. She could hear him breathing, could almost feel him choosing his words carefully. Whitney, he said finally, and the gentleness in his tone broke her heart. We missed the moment. What if we didn't? She heard the desperation in her own voice and hated it. What if we could still? Your voice isn't the same, he said simply, brutally, truthfully. I'm not trying to hurt you, but I won't lie to you either. The voice I wanted to record in 1991 doesn't exist anymore. And that's not entirely your fault. Clive worked you too hard, pushed you to tour when you needed rest. The industry took too much, demanded perfection when you needed grace. Life happened. Marriage, motherhood, all the weight of being Whitney Houston. But the moment we had, the window of possibility, it passed. Whitney closed her eyes, tears sliding down her cheeks. I chose wrong, didn't I? Quincy's response came slowly, weighted with years of industry wisdom and personal regret. You chose loyalty. That's never wrong, but it cost you your artistry. You became the biggest star in the world, but you never became the artist you could have been. And yeah, Whitney, that's a tragedy. Could we have made something great, she asked, if I'd said yes that night? We would have made something extraordinary, Quincy said, his voice warming with the memory of unrealized dreams. I had the songs. I had the arrangements. I knew exactly what to do with that voice of yours. The jazz album would have won every critic over. Standards reimagined, Gershwin with a gospel edge. The gospel album would have brought you back to your roots, reminded everyone where you came from, showcased that church power without the pop polish. The experimental album would have redefined what people expected from a black female vocalist. Fusion, world music, things nobody thought you could do. He paused and she could hear papers rustling on his end. I still have the notes, he continued. Still have the song concepts I wrote for you. Sometimes I look at them and think about the parallel universe where you walked away from Clive that night, where you trusted yourself more than you trusted your loyalty. Would I have been happier? Whitney asked. I don't know, Quincy admitted, but you would have been fulfilled. There's a difference. They talked for another 20 minutes. Two industry legends discussing roads not taken and choices that couldn't be unmade. When they finally said goodbye, Whitney sat in the darkness of her studio, thinking about the three albums that existed only in Quincy Jones's imagination. The jazz album that would have showcased her range beyond the pop belting everyone expected. The gospel album that would have reconnected her with the church girl she'd been before fame complicated everything. The experimental album that would have proven she was more than just a voice, she was an artist with something to say. All of it locked away in a parallel universe where she'd been brave enough to say yes to risk instead of loyal enough to say no to change. Quincy Jones never publicly discussed that Grammy night hallway conversation until after Whitney Houston died in February 2012. In interviews, he'd mentioned in passing that he'd wanted to work with her, that the timing never aligned, that it was one of his few professional regrets. But after her death, during a late-night television interview, he finally told the story. The host asked him about missed opportunities in his legendary career, and Quincy's face changed in a way that made the studio audience go silent. Whitney Houston, he said simply. 1991. I offered her the world and she chose security. The music industry is terrifying, especially for a young black woman at the top. Clive gave her safety, structure, success. I was offering risk, artistry, uncertainty. He pulled out a worn folder. He'd brought it specifically for this interview. These are the songs I wrote for those three albums, he said, opening pages of sheet music, lyric ideas, production notes. The jazz standards we would have reimagined. The gospel arrangements that would have made church folks and critics both testify. The experimental fusion that would have blown minds. The camera zoomed in on the yellowing pages, covered in Quincy's distinctive handwriting, musical notation, tempo markings and margin notes like, Whitney's whisper register here, and let her improvise, no limits, and this is where she becomes immortal. She called me in 2001, Quincy continued, his voice thick with emotion. Asked if the offer was still good. I had to tell her the truth. The voice I'd heard in 1991 was gone. Not completely, but enough that we couldn't make what I'd envisioned. The range was still there, but the ease, the effortless power, the thing that made Whitney Whitney, it had changed. In that phone call, having to tell one of the greatest vocalists of all time that her moment had passed, that we'd let the opportunity slip away, that's something I'll carry with me forever. The interviewer asked if he had regrets about being so direct with her. No, Quincy said firmly. Whitney deserved honesty. The industry had been lying to her for years, telling her she was fine when she wasn't, telling her the next album would be a comeback when everyone knew it wouldn't be. I gave her the respect of truth, but do I regret not trying harder that night in 1991? Not getting down on my knees and begging her to take a chance on herself? Yeah, I regret that every day. In his Los Angeles home, Quincy Jones still keeps those three album concepts in his studio. Sometimes late at night, when he's working on other projects, he'll pull them out and imagine what could have been. The alternate timeline where Whitney Houston became more than America's sweetheart with a powerful voice, where she became a true artist, respected and fulfilled, making music that challenged and inspired instead of just comforted. He's shown the concepts to a few trusted colleagues over the years. Everyone who sees them has the same reaction. These albums would have been revolutionary. They would have changed how the industry viewed female vocalists, especially black female vocalists. They would have proven that commercial success and artistic integrity weren't mutually exclusive, but they exist only as yellowing pages, a ghost of what might have been if a woman in a hallway had been brave enough to choose uncertainty over loyalty. The story of that Grammy night reminds us that our biggest choices often don't feel big in the moment. Whitney didn't know she was deciding her entire artistic legacy when she refused Quincy's contract. She thought she was just being loyal. But that 60-second conversation became a sliding door moment, one path leading to her actual life of commercial domination and personal struggle. the other leading to an alternate universe of artistic respect and creative fulfillment that we'll never get to hear. Sometimes the most important word we can say is yes to ourselves, even when it means saying no to the people we love. Whitney Houston chose loyalty over artistry that night. She became the biggest star in the world, but never became the artist Quincy knew she could be. Both carried that knowledge, that loss, that what if, forever. The greatest albums never made. The artist never fully realized. The voice that conquered the world but never freed itself. That's the real tragedy of February 20th, 1991. Not what happened, but what didn't.